full committee hearing on Delphi Pension Fallout, federal government. Takes from them. Second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective so ordered. Begin by thanking the Sinclair Community College being made available far beyond. Additional hearings. All members, both, have 5 days in which to put in statements and extreme member who wants to make a short statement, opening statement.
Mr. Chairman,
now go to the former chairman of the full committee. Has a huge population of people who have earned retirements that are not getting them here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you having this hearing here today, and I appreciate the comments of Representative Turner, who shares my concern about the inequities that have taken place. Mr. Chairman, Delphi Corporation was created in 1999 by General Motors through the spinoff of the company's automotive component group into a separate entity. In fact, many of the current Delphi retirees, hourly and salaried, spent the majority of their working career, on average about 25 years, with GM until they were involuntarily moved to Delphi. Regrettably, in 2005, Delphi Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. On October 6, 2009, 4 years after entering into Chapter 11, Delphi Corporation exited bankruptcy as Delphi Holdings under a restructuring plan facilitated by the Obama administration and approved by the U.S. District Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York. Under the terms of the agreement, the Federal Pension Benefits Guarantee Corporation assumed responsibility for all of the Delphi pension plans, roughly $6.2 billion in liability, for 6 Delphi pension plans covering approximately 70,000 employees and retirees. However, in a very unusual agreement as part of the restructuring plan, GM consented to use money from its own pension funds to supplement the 46,000 Delphi hourly union employees' pension payments to make up for the 30 to 70% cut in benefits resulting from the PBGC's takeover of the Delphi pension plans. This unprecedented agreement was not extended to the 21,000 salaried workers and retirees, which is really terrible. By some estimates, this resulted in a 70% reduction in pensions and loss of health care for salaried Delphi retirees. When questioned about the disparate treatment of Delphi employees and retirees, to this day, executives for GM will only say that the company agreed to supplement Delphi union employees and retirees because it had promised to do so in 1999, and that the company did not supplement Delphi non-union employees and retirees because it, quote, isn't something that GM has any control over. And GM doesn't have the legal obligation, nor does it have the money to refund those pensions. The explanations offered by GM are woefully insufficient. Once GM entered the bankruptcy, the contractual promise it made in 1999 was null and void, and it makes no business sense for a company trying to shed excessive debt to assume more debt. In reality, though, the blame does not lie with General Motors. I believe that evidence uncovered by this committee and others clearly shows that the Obama administration's auto task force made this decision for purely political reasons. In fact, Mr. Ron Bloom, former senior advisor to the Secretary of the Treasury on the auto bailout, admitted as much when he said in a celebratory dinner for the auto bailout team that, and this is his quote, he did this for all of the unions. On June 22, 2011, during the last committee hearing on this issue, when I questioned Mr. Bloom about his statement, he flatly and unequivocally denied that he ever said that. Unfortunately for Mr. Bloom, this statement was corroborated by a reporter for the Detroit Free Press and in a book by Mr. Bloom's former boss, auto czar Steve Ratner. 2 weeks later, after coming under fire from this committee and the media about his blatant lie under oath, and he should have been held in contempt. I still think we ought to do that, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bloom retracted his denial and instead claimed he did not, quote, recall ever saying that, but he did. Mr. Bloom's actions are sadly typical of this administration's blatant disregard for Congress's pursuit of the truth in this case. To the best of my knowledge, all congressional requests to the administration about this case have either been ignored or obfuscated. This is unacceptable and should not be tolerated, and I applaud the tenacity you have shown, Mr. Chairman. I don't tell you that very often, but I mean that. To keep investigating this matter further so we can uncover the real truth behind the Delphi pension scandal, and it is a scandal. I said back in October 2009, when I, along with others, first requested a congressional hearing on this issue, that I understood the restructuring America's auto industry requires shared sacrifice and responsibility. But Delphi's salaried retirees are being forced to bear extra burdens that are not warranted and have not been explained. It seemed to me at the time, and it still does, to be fundamentally unfair that salaried and union employees from the same company who faced the same unfortunate situation were treated so unequally by the administration and the federal government. The American people, especially from my perspective, the thousands of Hoosier families and people from Ohio who have been impacted by this policy and whose tax dollars were used to facilitate this travesty, deserve a full and transparent explanation from all parties involved, especially the administration. Hopefully today we can move one more step closer to an explanation. And once again, Mr. Chairman, I really want to thank you for having this hearing. I yield back.
With that, we'll
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this field hearing, and my colleagues for attending. It's very important, and I appreciate all the work that the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform has done thus far on this issue, and particularly Chairman Issa for scheduling this hearing. It's very important to our community. I know many of the folks here today I represent, and it's important that we have this hearing here in our area, and I thank you for that. And I especially want to thank the Delphi salary retirees for testifying today and all their efforts over the past several years to hold the administration accountable so that retirees can receive a fair pension. You know, I am very concerned about the unfair treatment received by Delphi salary retirees during the Delphi and GM bankruptcy proceedings. The administration, as Mr. Burton pointed out, ATF picking of winners and losers with Delphi retirees is something that should trouble, I think, all Americans. While Delphi workers stood side by side every day doing similar jobs at the same plants, the administration proactively made the decision that retirees from 3 unions would be basically unaffected by the bankruptcy. That's not the reason that we're here today. The reason we're here is because the unfair treatment of the Delphi salary retirees. While in some cases, and I had an opportunity to recently meet with several Delphi salary retirees last week in my office from our area, and I listened to the challenges that they have been facing with this unfair treatment. Some salary Delphi employees had a 30 to 70% reduction in their pensions, and others have lost all their health care and life insurance, and that's unacceptable and troubling. And it's unacceptable, and it must be fixed. And that's why we're here today to hear your testimony, and I thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's now here today to testify. Says Mr. Stephen Gabbia is a former executive director for employee benefits and salary policy at Delphi Corporation. And Mr. Chuck Cunningham is a former senior executive at Delphi Corporation. Gentlemen, pursuant to the rules of the committee, would you please rise to take the oath? Raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I so swear.
Witnesses answered in the affirmative. Please take a seat. Now, the rules of the committee are pretty straightforward. Your entire statement will be placed in the record, plus any extraneous remarks that you'd like to add within 5 days. We would ask you to stick to the 5-minute rule, which means that when the green light comes on, you may begin. The yellow light comes on, please summarize, and when it hits red, I'm going to gavel you fairly quickly, and I'll do that for each of the panels. And this really allows us to quickly get to the portion that's not in the records, which is the question and answer that I think you want to give to us as much as we want to receive it. Or Mr. Cunningham.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity for the Delphi retirees to tell our story today. My name is Chuck Cunningham. I'm a retiree who worked 27 years for General Motors and 3 for Delphi. I now serve as the DSRA legal liaison to our Washington law firm. Of coordinating activities between the retirees and our attorneys. In 2009, as you have all put, the Obama administration decided to bail out General Motors through an expedited bankruptcy. We're not here today to discuss the merits or the wisdom of that bailout. That's not for us to discuss. But we are here to talk about the consequences of those actions that were devastating for one group, the Delphi salaried retirees. In order to ensure a successful emergence from bankruptcy for GM, the issue of Delphi had to be dealt with. And that was a task the Auto Task Force and the Treasury took up because Delphi was previously spun off from GM. It was their major parts supplier. And in order for GM to be successful in the future, there had to be a viable Delphi. Just had to happen. We understand that. I think everybody understands that. One of the issues of importance to purchasers of Delphi were the Delphi pension liabilities. The Auto Task Force looked at various options, and we know they looked at them. It's a matter of record, including returning those pensions to GM, but they chose not to do this. They decided that this would not look good on GM's balance sheet. Therefore, the decision was made to turn over all Delphi pensions to the PBGC, but with one caveat. The new GM would top off only Delphi UAW pensions and make them whole. The Auto Task Force called this a commercial decision to ensure the UAW's cooperation in the restructuring. But more than a month later, the announcement was made that the pensions of the Delphi CWA, IUE, and steelworkers would also be topped up, leaving only the salary employees and a few small unions without the top-offs. Now, we hear many, many times from people that advocate on part of the administration, the Auto Task Force, that it was contractual. It was done in 1999. The truth of the matter is, as Representative Burton so well put, these things would have been thrown out in the bankruptcy court. They always were. You know, a less than astute student in bankruptcy knows that. But they weren't. As Fritz Henderson, the CEO of GM, testified at the time during the bankruptcy, there was absolutely no reason for them to have this arrangement with the CWA, IUE, or the steelworkers anymore. They had no employees. They had divested themselves of all those employees from those unions. There was no contract, and he said so. In an 8K filing that was done by GM, it called these gratuitous. The top-offs were gratuitous. Now, why were they done? We believe they were done because the IUE, CWA, and the steelworkers put pressure on the administration, put pressure on the Treasury to provide those top-offs also. It's interesting to note that a large portion of the membership of those unions was present in the state of Ohio, which is a very important swing state. And we believe that these were basically politically motivated. Unfortunately, we didn't have the connections. We thought it was a pure case of discrimination against the salaried employees who had chosen not to join a union. I would ask anyone to think about this in terms of our country's Social Security. Now, suppose a administration decided that everybody but Asian Americans would receive Social Security. I think we'd be outraged. How could that be? How could we decide one group would not receive the same pension treatment as another? I think this is about the same thing we're talking about today. The worst part about this is the PBGC, who I understand is on a later panel, was complicit in all this. They did not object to the impermissible follow-up plans that were disguised as top-ups. They've always objected to those plans in the past, and in fact took LTV to the Supreme Court to fight a top-off plan. But for some reason, they choose not to. Now, I wouldn't mention that the Secretary of Treasury is the head of their board of directors, but that's a fact. Instead,
if you could summarize.
Okay. We're in a legal conflict right now, and we are moving forward with it. But we're in the discovery stage. We've been very successful, but the PBGC has failed to give us the information that the federal judge has demanded of them. We've had to get a motion to compel and many other issues, but 3 times they've been told to comply. They will not comply. Thank you.
I am Stephen Gov't, former Executive Director of Employee Benefits for Delphi Corporation. I held that position from Delphi's inception in 1999 until I retired in June earlier this year in 2011. During this entire time, I held administrative responsibilities for Delphi's global employee benefit plans, including the U.S. salaried and hourly defined benefit pension plans that were involuntarily terminated by the PBGC in July of 2009. My administrative responsibilities included designing and developing the various pension plans, negotiating their provisions with the unions, ongoing communications with employees, retirees, unions, and oversight of the day-to-day.
With my HTC Radar 4G, keeping track of friends is easy with the People Hub. That inspired my next piece.
The HTC Radar 4G with People Hub. In the right hands, amazing things happen. Available at T-Mobile.
During the almost 4-year period during Delphi's bankruptcy cases up until the PBGC involuntarily terminated Delphi's pension plans, Delphi's management team repeatedly communicated to employees its desire to retain these plans as part of the bankruptcy restructuring. Like others, I was very surprised when I learned that the pension plans were going to be terminated and taken over by the PBGC, and I was extremely disappointed when I learned that it was decided that only the hourly employee pension benefits, but not the salaried employee pension benefits, would be topped up by General Motors, and therefore would be made whole. Several employees came to me and asked me to quantify for them the impact on this seemingly unexplainable action on their drastically reduced pension benefits. Because I did not personally have the access to the information they were requesting, I contacted Towers Watson and asked for their help in responding to the questions and concerns being raised by Delphi's salaried employees. During our discussion, Towers Watson offered to me and to members of my staff that while the salaried pension plan was not fully funded at the time of the involuntary termination, it was, however, funded well above a level that would have required mandatory termination of this plan. In fact, Towers Watson stated that this plan had enough assets to pay benefits for decades to come, and that they also opined that this plan was very salvageable should there be any sincere desire to save it. They stated the reasons for their opinions were based on these 4 items. 1, the data derived from their most recent actuarial valuation of the plan. 2, the fact that the plan was frozen in October of 2008, meaning no new benefits would accrue going forward from that point in time. 3, the equity markets, the stock market, at that time were at historic lows, keeping asset values lower than they normally would have been. And 4, the discount rates were also extremely low by historical standards, thereby overstating the plan's liability valuations over the near term. Towers Watson further offered that they believe that other bankruptcy cases existed where pension plans were funded at levels lower than the Delphi salaried pension plan but had not been taken over by the PBGC. Now, to the best of my personal recollection, Delphi salaried pension plan had total liabilities of about $4 billion at this time, and it was underfunded by roughly $1 billion at the time the plan was last valued by Towers Watson prior to the plan's termination. This concludes my statement.
Being prompt. And I'll preface by saying that my family is General Motors family, but my father passed away many years ago, so I'm not personally affected by it, but I do look at the broader problem of what I call the would have, could have, and should have. What would have happened had this been handled in either of the 2 ways that you're mentioning, and I'll follow up with that. What could have happened if the government had said, if you will, what is the best course to take, rather than making a decision that undoubtedly had a lot to do with their relationship with the unions, and they're, in fact, getting made 100% whole. And then for our committee, I think the most important thing that we're here is, in addition to trying to bring justice for the retirees that you represent, quite frankly, we've got to figure out how to make sure this doesn't happen again, either by government fiat or, in fact, in the defined benefits packages that continue to this day with many companies. So let me just go through figures that are most significant. If General Motors had said, this is all the money we can do to try to make as whole as we can everybody, even with the termination, basically leaving the salaried employees with about a 70% discount and making whole the roughly twice as many, come out with about 66% if you simply divide the money equally. Is that roughly what you're seeing, is that the haircut that you took would have been less than half as much had the same amount of money been broadly put into all of the pensions?
I'm not sure I can speak to that.
Yeah, that's roughly the arithmetic I'm seeing.
Mr. Cunningham.
I guess I would go to...
I'm not suggesting that it's a should have in my would have, could have, but the fact is that if everyone had had shared sacrifice, as has been said by so many, the shared sacrifice would have been less than half as much for your people represented by the DSRA if it had been shared across all employees.
To give you a reference to that, I would agree with you. In fact, I think you're a little on the low side. It would have even been better.
The other part of it, yeah. If you simply left it continuing to go and assuming kind of the lackadaisical performance of the market, you still would have gotten about 75 cents on the dollar if they'd simply hadn't terminated. So whether it's terminated low and spread the plus up, or don't terminate, either way, you'd have been more than half the haircut you've taken.
In fact, the irony is, if they would have just done what they were discussing with the PBGC and GM originally, and folded it into the GM salary plan, those two plans together, the Delphi and the GM plan, would have been about 94% funded. But it was decided they didn't want that on the books.
You know, one of the things that our committee has to look at is, can we unring a bell? And I think for many people here today, that's one of the biggest challenges. When we get to the third panel is going to basically say, due process was executed pursuant to our rules. We had no choice. You back up and say, maybe they're right, assuming that a bankruptcy court didn't give a clean bill of health to a very unusual deal, assuming that they didn't do a clawback the way they did with Bernie Madoff and say, no, this was a preferential payment, and that preferential payment has to be divided throughout the entire estate. All of those would-haves, could-haves, and should-haves we're going to look at. Are there other areas that you think this committee should delve into going forward that would be helpful, not to specific litigation, that's not within our jurisdiction, but for us to see if we can't bring justice separately in congressional action, and more importantly, to the American people, beyond all of you that are so affected, making sure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, I think, interesting enough, some people say, well, you're asking Congress to appropriate money. We're not. In fact, the PBGC has stated in an affidavit in the legal case that they are putting $2.1 billion into our plan. If you add that together with the 2.4 that they admit was the amount that plan was funded, that comes out to 4.5. Watson Wyatt came in somewhere between 3.4 and 4. All we'd like to do is sit down with the PBGC and work through those numbers. We believe that under normal actuarial data, that we could have a fully funded pension administered by the PBGC, which is totally legal. But we can't even get them to give us documents, let alone talk to us. I mean, it's a shame.
Thank you, and I want to be respectful of the 5-minute rule also. I now recognize Mr. Burton.
Why can't you get the records? If the court has said that those records must be given to you, has the judge moved a contempt citation against them for not complying?
We have not set forth a motion for contempt yet. We have another meeting with the PBGC coming up, but this is the third time that the judge has ordered discovery, and it's the third time we are now seeing resistance on the part of the PBGC.
Are you concerned that the judge will not move a contempt citation if you ask him to do so?
I would rather not speak to that, but I don't think that's the case at all.
Well, if that's not the case, and of course you're the lawyer, and I'm
not a lawyer.
Well,
I'm
whatever you are.
I've become what I'm going to.
Folks, please do not applaud to find out that he's not a lawyer. Please. Gentlemen may continue.
Well, whatever is your law firm, I would urge them, if the judge has said not once, not twice, but 3 times, there should be discovery, and that information should be given to you, that your law firm say, okay, enough's enough to the court, and urge them to go ahead and move a contempt citation. Because if the administration or if those in charge will not give it to you or to your legal counsel, then by golly, they should be held in contempt, and there should be a severe fine involved. So anyhow, can you elaborate a little bit further? What's your lawyer's explanation for why they haven't done it?
I think, our lawyers can't give an explanation for what they say.
No, but I mean, why haven't they moved a contempt citation?
I believe there are civil procedures that have to be followed before we can ask for that. There's civil rules of federal court, and we're following those. And believe me, we will do everything we can under the law to get that information. We've gotten some information. We've got what they call the administrative record, but we've not gotten all the information that the judge has given us in a broad discovery sense. But a lot of the information we have received, like from the PBGC and the Treasury, is really interesting. It says, it might be an email, and it says, "Dear John." The rest is redacted, and it says, "Yours truly, Fred." I mean, that's the type of information we're getting from them. Huge redactions or nothing at all.
Well, redactions are usually only utilized when there's some kind of national security issue involved. I can't understand why the court's allowing redactions, which means crossing out things so you can't read them. But anyhow, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman.
That is absolutely correct. is correct from my standpoint, yes.
The thing that's most disturbing.
Which of course we do. Yes. If we can hold.
Well, I think the message that I wanted to convey here, coming from Towers Watson, who are the experts here, was that the financial condition of that salaried pension plan was not the reason that it was terminated. It did not have to be terminated because of the level of funding. So there must have been other reasons. I don't know what they were, but it wasn't this.
Representative Turner, if I may make a point, we, after getting knowledge of that Towers Watson report, we contracted with BDS&M, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Wells Fargo, to do an analysis, follow-up analysis on that report. They found the same thing, that our pension plan was funded at the time of termination, in fact higher than that, over 80%, and that it stood above the midpoint of the 100 largest pension plans in the country at that time, none of which were terminated. So, no, it was expeditious to do that. It wasn't the right thing to do. Besides, in cases like this, ERISA is clear. These kind of things have to be adjudicated. They should not be done by tacit agreement between the people wanting to get rid of the plan and the PBGC.
PBBC, I always trying to say that, be as much mentioned in their dialogue, but with that we recognize.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gov't and Mr. Cunningham, thank you both for being here today and sharing your stories. Because as I heard your testimony, like many of the members up here, my uncle and brother-in-law both retired from GM, and it's very troubling. as to what has happened here. And I'd like to just continue on, if we could, as much as you're able to, with the ongoing lawsuit between the Delphi Salary Retirees Association and the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. Let me first of all say that I applaud your determination to ensure that the Delphi retirees receive a fair pension. However, it's concerning to me that while the trial court has ordered this discovery, and you mentioned that there was a lot of the documents, or some of the documents have been redacted as far as much of the information, which is very troubling. PBGC continues to delay and refuse to comply with these orders. Are you able to describe to the committee the effects of these actions have on the retirees and your lawsuit the longer this goes? Because I think one of you mentioned, or someone mentioned to me before this hearing, that this has now been going on, this issue has been going on for over 1,000 days now.
I think that the second panel will probably do a better job of describing that than us, and that's their mission here today. Right. But I will say that, I mean, the financial burden of the lawsuit is tremendous. I mean, you know, the irony is, again, this whole thing is ironic. We are spending money that we don't have to fight a government that has our money. And it just, you know, it's a little odd, but that's what we're doing. I mean,
seems like an unfair fight to me.
Well, and they can spend all the money they want on attorneys, and believe me, we have wonderful attorneys, the best we could have. But you know, it gets a little long, and it gets very expensive. But we're not going to quit, by the way.
Okay. Let me just, if I could, just one last comment, because you brought up the Treasury, Mr. Chairman, which is very important. I know our delegation and many other members of Congress signed that letter that we sent to Secretary Geithner in an effort to get a response back. And I wanted to discuss that with you as well as to what input the Delphi retirees and non-union employees had during this time to protect their interests in a fully funded pension and continued benefits. I'm talking about when Delphi went through the bankruptcy and terminated the pension plans. There were several parties that were involved, including the Treasury Department, the Auto Task Force, PBGC, and unions. And each of these parties were concerned with resolving the bankruptcy in a manner that would be most beneficial for their particular interests. What was your position on that, or what interest did you have?
We were never invited to the table in any way, shape, or form. The Delphi salary retirees were not invited to the table. Meetings were held. In fact, a meeting that we would love to get information on was held in Poughkeepsie, New York, at the direction of the bankruptcy court. The PBGC and their attorney, one of which is here today, I think, were there. The UAW was there. The Treasury Department was there. GM was there. Delphi salary retirees weren't there. So all the constituents were there, except us.
Was there a reason that they gave you that you were not included in those meetings or during those?
Well, they wouldn't answer those kind of questions. I mean, we went to bankruptcy court. This isn't just the Sixth Circuit we've been fighting. We fought in the bankruptcy court. We watched our case get just thrown out just like that from the judge. We also watched 3 small unions that had the same problem. They were not politically important. I watched their attorneys argue cases where their contracts in 1999 were identical to the UAW's. Didn't matter. And then they couldn't go back and lobby. They were too small. We've reached out to those people and talked with them. So, you know, we weren't going to be part of the process. The decision was made. If you go back, we have a lot of information. Not enough, not all of it. But if you go back to even written testimonies of Matthew Feldman from the Automotive Task Force, you'll see that, you know, they basically orchestrated this whole thing, and the PBGC was complicit. I mean, one of the other things, I just bring this up today, and I thank someone who isn't here today, and he's from the minority side, but that's Senator Sherrod Brown, who held up the nomination of Mr. Gov't as the director of the PBGC until the president decided to do a recess appointment. And guess what Mr. Gov't did before that? He represented the dip financiers for Delphi, who were part of the deal with the PBGC with the Treasury. And ironically, a month ago, Harry Wilson, who was on that automotive task force, specifically responsible for GM and one of the architects, became a member of the advisory board of the PBGC. Something's wrong.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you, before I dismiss you, one quick round of questions that I'll ask each of the The union threatened Mike's GC that the real workers would not simply currently threaten to walk off the job in order to ensure that you have the same benefits. Really what's needed between the current hold up the question who is retired that would that was I believe that's half. Strike. They didn't get that half. The media had left. People believe the other half had nothing to do with it. Bankrupt. Reasonable by workers to job in order to is that unfair separate unfair minds difference unfair law unfair isolate the other using unfairness to select unfair deal unfair I say more or less the only way I can that's the logical way to look at it. Thank you. Said I'm going to ask the panels that I think the truth on more than believe that I think short I think as far as